Everybody, let's start now our second afternoon. Are we ready? Hello? Should we start? Thank you. Good. Yeah. So, I'm very happy to be here with three good colleagues, and we are going to have a very interesting and fascinating, I'm sure, session. So, without much ado, I would like to present you Professor Dr. Sister Tereza Obolevich. She is a professor and head of the Department of Russian and Byzantine Philosophy at the Faculty of Theology in the Pontifical University of John Paul II in Krakow, Poland. Her topic, I think it's really resound, is Russian religious thought in the face of modernity. Mm-hmm. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to say thank you again for inviting me here. And of course, the topic is very, very broad, so it's impossible to say everything, and even a large part of this topic, Russian religious philosophy and modernity. But at first, I'd like to consider very briefly what modernity is. According to Hannah Arendt, I decided to choose this definition or this description. Modernity is characterized by the loss of the world. Is the age when totalitarian form of government such as Nazism, Stalinism have emerged as a result of the institutionalization of terror and violence. Modernity is the age where the past no longer carries any certainty of variation, where individuals, having lost their traditional standards and values, must search for new grounds of human community as such. It is, and seems, not so much a specific period of history as opposed to a fairly well-defined modernism, because recently we also discussed about modernism and modernity. So it is not such a selected period of history, rather, but a state of social being characterized by the loss of certain fundamental values, especially religious one, according to this definition or this point of view. It could be used to some extent as a synonym of secularization. The notion of modernism is quite very well defined in standard Encyclopedia of Philosophy, so you can find it in internet. But modernity, it is in this context about which I will go into to discuss, means more or less secularization. The idea of crisis of religion stems from the classical sociological division between pre-modern religious traditional societies and modern secular one. Secularization becomes a standard category for modernization, more generally thus for giving a synonymous relation between the two terms. And Russian religious philosophy was formed and reached its apogee in a period that stretched between the two poles of modernity. In the 19th century, marked by positivism on the one hand and romanticism on the other, and the first half of the 20th century, on the eve of post-secularism, which is a fundamental element for the end of modern time and a specific form of modernity. And now we can speaking about secularization and post-secularism, it is described in the literature. We could consider what post-secularism means. Is it a crisis of religion or revival of religion? Again, revival or renaissance or invention, something new, or simply presence of religion. Because nowadays we don't speak about secularization, but most often about post-secularism. Post-secularism is an era which is overcoming, marked by overcoming of secularization. It's a well-known history. After the terrorist attack in New York, the significance of religion was again involved into the discourse, academic discourse, and from that time we are speaking about post-secularism. Okay, speaking about Russia, it's interesting to notice that even in the 18th century, it's thought about so-called religious enlightenment. On the one hand, during the period of the reign of Ekaterini II, it was a period of secularization of the church, when church lost its autonomy and was submitted to the government. But on the other hand, in literature described as a religious enlightenment. It means a period, unlike on the West, again the opposition between West and East, unlike on the West, where the French Revolution and the period of modern thinkers like Voltaire and others propound the model of secularization of culture. In Russia, it was a time where religion was taken into account for many forms of also social life. So, but was it either religion's enlightenment or just a hidden form of secularization? It is a good question. Russian religious philosophy appeared in the more or less in the 19th century. The father of Russian religious thought is Vladimir Solovyov, present here on the left. This kind of, perhaps here, of philosophizing has some specific form, which I'm going to discuss later on. During Soviet regime, the so-called Soviet type of secularization took place. Soviet type secularization, which means the open fighting with religion and escaping religion from any forms of social life and also private life, of course. Recently, in Europe and in the United States, we have been confronted with a great debate on the relationship between religion and secular world. It's time that we are witnesses of a true post-secular turn. Jürgen Habermas, in his famous speech, put secular reason to profit from the remain of religion which had been retained in contemporary societies. Many other authors, including Jacques Derrida, Alain Badiou, Slavoj Žižek, quite surprisingly became interested in Christianity. On the other hand, the radical orthodoxy movement, like John Milbank and others, tried to answer this interest from the Catholic point of view. Modernity rests on the assumption of the fundamental division between the old pre-modern religious society and contemporary modern secular one. Secularization was seen for a long time as an inherent component of the process of modernization. Nowadays, however, the assumption of a great divide between the religious and secular ages is being questioned more and more. The border between the religious and the secular turned out to be not so clear and distinct as it was believed. The general problem of the role of religion entails a number of more specific questions, such as the issue of religion toleration, ecumenical and interreligious dialogue, the presence and contribution of religious, including metaphysical, concerning the sphere of transcendence, foundation, and aspects of multicultural, pluralistic society, as well as their possible limits, the democratization of the sphere of religion, the problem of religious language, and etc. The debate of post-secularism has also engaged contemporary Russian thinkers, especially in view of this phenomenon, Soviet type of secularization. The shape of reflection on post-secular culture in Russian thought is quite different from that in Western society. It pays more attention not only to the crisis of religious consciousness, but also to the alleged death of God. It's no surprise that the topic of post-secularism recently has received attention in both popular and more elite intellectual Russian press, literature, and so on. For many years, Russia even was considered as laboratory of post-secularism. Is it true now? It's a question. It's an open question. Because nowadays we have completely different situation and different challenges also in front of Russian philosophy. Okay. It was considering some characteristic features of Russian religious classical, not contemporary, but classical philosophy, which are a response to the phenomenon of secularization. These include many features, but I select just three of them. First of all, the strict connection between philosophy and religious. It means that from the very beginning, philosophy in Russia was linked to the patristic heritage. Hence, the very first philosophical treatises were religious in character. And also in the so-called Silver Age, the turn of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, religious provoked philosophical reflection. And different type of reflections had philosophical reflection had religious meaning. For instance, when discussed about man, man was considered as a part of good manhood or divine humanity, or as a member of the church, not just a separate, isolated entity. Unlike on the West, where person is a most profound, most influential category until now, and we can speak about dignity of person, right of person, and so on and so on. In Russia, person means to be person means to be a part of the church of the good manhood. So it is a strictly religious context for philosophical anthropology. Also considering about cosmos, the conception of so-called cosmos appeared in Russian philosophy, which means also the connection between man and nature and so on, which is extremely important for contemporary discourse about environment, ecology, and so on. Cosmos is as a part of divine creation, of course. So from this point of view, cosmos not just a secular category, but religious category. That's very interesting and very, very inspiring also for today. Also speaking about epistemological reflection, how we can get knowledge, because according to Kiriyevsky and Slava Feisen and other thinkers, we have to renew our mind, to put our mind to another level of thinking, in union with God, with revelation, with logos, eventually. Logos, it is the key category for Russian philosophy, unlike ratio. It was a great discussion between logos and ratio, again, which is a part of discussion the opposition between East and West and so on. So from this point of view, religious character is a very specific feature of Russian philosophy created in Russia. So from the very beginning, I mean, not, of course, difficult to say what it means, the very beginning of Rutenia or something else, you know, it's an open question and much discussed. But speaking about Solovyov and then Russian philosophy and immigration, we can see that religious, it is an integral part of philosophizing, not just something additional. Religious, it is really key category. As a position of secularization, modernity, and so on. So from this point of view, Russian philosophy was an answer to modernity, in a way. The second feature of Russian philosophy is non-academic character and its existential dimension. You can see the two portraits of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy as two most representative writers, but also philosophers in Russia. Speaking about existential dimension, I suppose there is no need to comment at all, because reading Dostoevsky, we just have a great example of these existential questions and attempt to couple with existential problems like meaning of life and death and so on. And non-academic, it means that Russia was developed not mostly within universities, but outside of university. Again, unlike on the West. Outside, it means in literature, in some essays, different kinds of philosophizing, even icon is considered as a place of locum philosophicum, as a place of philosophizing. So not mostly in academic text written by the professors of the universities, but outside. But it means that philosophy was much closer to people than on the West, because every people could attend the church and see and contemplate the icons, could read Dostoevsky's book and others. It means some philosophical ideas were implemented directly into society, not just for some academic sphere. Okay, and another feature, which is also very typical for Russian philosophy, it's the idea of community, or fraternity, or consularity, or soborność. Soborność is just untranslatable term. In this milieu, I suppose there is no need to explain in details, but consularity, it supposes the unity between horizontal and vertical levels. It's not just solidarity. On the West, we can speak about fraternity and so on, keeping in mind solidarity, the union and between man here on this world. But in Russian philosophy, sobornost supposes the rootedness in divine principle, in logos. It means the union between God and humankind. But it also could be treated as a synonym of all unity, which is strictly metaphysical category, the unity of all being, as a synonym of cosmos, or integral knowledge, which also specifically term elaborated in Russia, which means the strict connection between philosophy, theology, and science. Not just only science, only theology, but the connection of those three fields gives the true knowledge, integral knowledge. So integrality, it is also very important feature for this kind. Now let's consider the question how the mentioned features of Russian thought are manifested in two specific philosophical concepts and proposals for overcoming secularism. One took place in the 19th century, at the beginning of the emergence of independent Russian philosophy marked by Vladimir Solovyov, and other after the experience of communist regime in exile. It was represented by Simeon Frank. These proposals, however, are not only historical in nature, but could and still do inspire contemporary researchers in the post-secular era and secular region. Vladimir Solovyov, who lived in the second half of the 19th century, took a series of 12 lectures of Good Manhood or Divine Humanity, it is another translation, which was delivered in St. Petersburg and then published as a separate book. And maybe here. In the announcement posted by the St. Petersburg branch of the Society for Spiritual Education, it was stated that the task of Mr. Solovyov's lecture will be to demonstrate the rationality of positive religion. Rationality of positive religion. To show that the truth of faith, in the fullness of its concrete content, is at the same time the truth of reason. Truth of faith as the truth of reason. It was a project very large discussed in Solovyov's work of rationalization of faith. It means that Solovyov tried to make religion attractive for his contemporary readers, because religion lost its significance in the era of positivism. It was one of the most influential philosophical current at that time. So Solovyov, trying to overcome positivism from the very beginning of his writing, proclaimed the significance of religion. And as he said, a philosophy of religion is equally necessary for all thinking people, those who believe and those who do not. For the former ought to be known what they believe, and the latter should to know what they deny. Even people deny religion, it should know what he or she deny. So he tried to show that the truth of faith, like the dogma on the Holy Spirit, Holy Trinity, the dogma of divine and human nature of Christ and others, are rational in nature. It's possible for Solovyov to demonstrate that the Holy Trinity is really Trinity. God is not just God the Father, or the Son, or the Holy Spirit, but he could be Trinity. It's a very sophisticated dialectics here, stemmed from Hegel and other German idealists. So I skip this point. It's really quite sophisticated reflection. Nevertheless, he tried to persuade his contemporaries in the truth of Holy Trinity. using philosophy as a tool for demonstrating some religious truths. So Solovyov initiated the program of rationalization of Christian faith, exploring the tools of philosophy and even science. He himself studied biology and physics in order to make it more comprehensible for his contemporaries. It was the attempt to overcome the crisis of religion and metaphysics especially. So he tried to explore the truth on God and the truth on man as rooted in God. Religion for him is the reunification of humanity and the world with the absolute integral principle. Again, the integrity is a very, very important category here. Neither man nor God is self-sufficient for him. Man needs God, but also God needs man. So, starting with this point of view, he demonstrates that the unity between God and man exists and should exist. At the really sense of religion as such. Again, nowadays it could be considered just some historical interests, but from his point of view, for his time, it was really very, very new attempt at overcoming of crisis of religion. Another case study was proposed by Simeon Frank. He experienced the totalitarian regime and progressive secularization of post-revolutionary and post-war society. He has a Jewish origin, which left Russia, also called philosophical steamer. He lived in Germany, then in England. He died in London. So he experienced both Russian Revolution and then Nazi regime. During his stay in France as a Jew, he had to wrote without any hope for publish it. Some of his work were published after his death in English, some in Russia. And he left some very profound consideration, also available in English, concerning Christian culture and Christian politics. It is a quotation, that Christian Europe, the site of the highest spiritual culture yet known to man, became the arena of the unspeakably cruel mutual mass destruction. To call it bestiality would be an affront to the animal world. Only the whole of Christian Europe is guilty beyond any doubt. Christendom has had a terrible lesson. It is a secularized state. It had lost its spirit and had begun to think that politics and life on earth in general can be put right satisfactorily by means of enlightened egotism, and that Christian morality, as it is best a kind of extra accessory for human soul in very intimate individual existence. Faith in God was replaced with faith in man and his dignity. Subsequently, again a quotation. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Secular humanism became more and more a pseudo-religious faith, which lacks religious or metaphysical ground. At the same time, Frank maintained that this sorrowful state of affairs had not destroyed the deepest foundation of man created in the image of and likeness of God. As Frank put it, holiness turns out to be weak and powerless in the world, but it does not therefore stop being holiness. As a consequence, not only does individual human entity retain their sacral dimension despite the numerous attempts to suppress any manifestations of the inner religious component, but so also does the holy society and culture. To put it differently, every society, even the most secularized, has a theocratic basis. Was Frank too optimistic when he teaches that every society, even the most secular one, if North Korea, for instance, has some religious root? The answer is, of course, not such obvious, but I risk to say no. Frank wasn't too optimistic. We cannot describe his thought as utopian or naive. Considering the presence of spiritual foundation of human life, Frank referred to Christian tradition and determined his own stand as Christian realism. It was his own position, Christian realism, which is a via media between utopianism and the cynic materialistic real politics. In his book entitled The Light Shines in Darkness, written during the Second World War and published after the war in 1949, Frank noted the following words, it's a quotation: "The makeup of religion's experience, the perception of the reality of holiness, also includes the immediate experience of that His Holiness as an invincible, all-conquering force, that is, supremacy signifies its inner, immanent, all-powerfulness. This experience is so immediate, so self-evident to our heart, that insofar as we really have this experience, it cannot be shaken by any facts, by any empirical truths. Let the problem of theodicy remain involved. Let it be the case that we are unable to understand how the metaphysical all-powerfulness of holiness is compatible with the empirical lordship of evil. This contradiction shakes the certainty of religious experience as little as the certainty of any empirical fact is shaken by any intellectual inability to harmonize it with each other known facts. Okay, there is a lot of many other considerations, because I know that my time is about over. So Frank, during the communist regime, during the totalitarian regime and others, tried to answer to this very question: how religious is possible, even during such a very cruel regime? By the way, in Krakow we have a series of conferences. Perhaps some of you heard about this, which is called Krakow Meetings, and dedicated to Russian philosophy. And a couple of years ago, we had a conference about secularism and Russian philosophy. So we issued two books, Overcoming the Secular and another, Beyond Modernity. If some of you are interested in this publication, I can send you a PDF. Okay, from the classical point of view of, the point of view of classical religious thought, it's quite clear. And what about nowadays? until recently, more or less until 2022, it was possible to talk about the situation of post-secularism in Russia and reflect on this phenomenon from the perspective of Russian philosophy. And it was evidenced by the conferences, Krakow meetings. However, nowadays, the Russian aggression in Ukraine and the Russian Orthodox Church involvement in the war, quite recently, Patriarch Kirill said that it is God providence that Russia has a nuclear weapon, so something completely, I cannot describe this, provoked new and new question about Russian philosophy, about the stature of Russian philosophy. If it's possible to study Russian philosophy or not. Of course, it is possible. But there are new challenges before us, new challenges. On the website of Krakow meeting, we said that the traditions of Russian religious philosophy stand for human dignity and for freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Perhaps I could call this state of affairs in contemporary Russia as religious secularism, perhaps, using religious for secular aims, secular purposes. Perhaps, maybe it is a secular religion. Perhaps it is secularization of the church. We have to consider this, we have to reflect on this. So it is the task for us. Using for the great examples of Russian classical religious tradition to try to answer to contemporary challenges and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we proceed now to our next speaker, Professor Konstantinos Papastathis, from the Department of Political Science at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. And he is going also to present, I'm going to read the title, Investigating Modernization, the Orthodox Christian World, the Jerusalem Church and the Sacralisation of the Nation. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I have for changing the... Oh. It's okay. Wait. Until he's Okay. So, thank you so much, Professor. I would like first to thank Professor Makridis for inviting me to this extremely interesting conference. This is my first time at Volos Academy. I consider it an honor for giving me the opportunity to present my work at this distinguished institution for theological studies, not only in Greece, I would say, but at a European level. The paper addresses, okay, because of my poor English, I prepared this PowerPoint, so it's, the paper addresses the question of modernization within the Orthodox Church of Jerusalem, exploring the theoretically paradox articulation of allegedly conflicting processes of nationalizing the holy and sacralizing the nation. In particular, the research focuses on the ideological background and mechanisms of representing national essentialism as a perpetual historical fact and thus pre-modern, while in contrast forms an effect of modernity and the overall nationalization process of Eastern Orthodoxy. The case study of this research is the Church of Jerusalem. Despite Jerusalem's theological significance as a symbol of unity between God and humanity, transcending divisions like race or nation within the religious community, visitors to the Patriarchate of Jerusalem and its dependencies, the various monasteries in Palestine, Israel, the visitor may encounter a paradox site, namely the Greek national symbol, the Greek flag, flying at the entrance of these monasteries. This practice, initiated after the 6 Days War in 1967, symbolizes the brotherhoods of the Holy Sepulchre, alleged Greek national identity, making Greek heritage the primary criterion for membership in its ranks, despite the fact that the jurisdiction of the Church of Jerusalem is exercised over non-Greek territories, the Palestine-occupied territories, Israel and Jordan. Second, the members of the Patriarchate congregation are indigenous Palestinian Arabs. And three, or traditionally, because now there are Russians as well. And three, there is not an officially recognized institutional ground in support, in terms of history, of historical accuracy, in support for the establishment of such a national status. So, the presentation explores the Hellenization process and briefly, and investigates the influence of this process over the institutional framework of the Church. Additionally, it examines the impact of the political and financial aspects on the potential reform within the community, and I conclude with discussing briefly the effects of the Patriarchate's interaction with the other Christian communities. The sources to be used as data for analysis are various state archives, such as the Public Record Office, the Greek Ministry of Foreign, the Greek Diplomatic and Historical Archives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Israel State Archives, published records, material from church reviews, and official church documents, and of course secondary literature. The method for elaborating the material builds on social constructivism and post-structuralism. Okay. So, the Hellenization process. Overall, the current Greek control was made practically possible for a variety of historical factors. In brief, these were, first, the centralization process, namely the elevation of the Church of Constantinople, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, as the dominant religious institution, expanding on the ground its jurisdiction and placing actually under its de facto control the Jerusalem Church, the affairs of which had to be transacted via the mechanism of Constantinople. The Fanar became practically the central authority of the Jerusalem Patriarchate, electing its head, managing its finances, and controlling its affairs in relation to the port from at least the 17th century onwards and until the mid-19th century. The second historical factor was the nationalization process, and in particular, the Greek clergymen became at the course of time dominant at the expense of their co-religionists of Arab or other ethnic, not national, ethnic origin. This was made possible because of the paradigmatic shift in the political orientation of the religious establishment from universalism to Greek ethnocentrism as the Patriarchate's hegemonic ideology from the late Ottoman period onwards. The main factors behind this modern development were, first, the Tanzimat reforms, which acted as a catalyst for significant social changes, reinforcing the development of a new collective identity, the nation, while breaking down loyalties to the previous dominant factor of religious affiliation. The transformation of Orthodox Church structures from non-ethnic religious representation to national-based religious affiliation occurred across different Orthodox regions. As a result, the previously ecumenical and cohesive Orthodox world, organized into large ecclesiastical entities with a centralized administrative system, fragmented into ethnic-based religious elites governing specific ecclesiastical territories, their known national churches. Kitromilidis, Lekas, Matalas, Stamatopoulos, and I think also Professor Kalegidis, Professor Makridis have written in relation to this broad theme. The second factor for this nationalization process in Jerusalem was Russia's influence. So Russia played a pivotal role in fueling the divisions within the communities, supporting the nation-building efforts, and exploiting the antagonisms between the newly formed national groups. As regards Jerusalem, the Russian penetration was represented in two forms. First, diplomatic pressure was applied to implement central political reforms exemplified by the significant change in the patriarchal election process in 1847. In effect, the authority to nominate candidates shifted from the ecumenical patriarchate to the Jerusalem Brotherhood. Furthermore, it became mandatory for the patriarch to reside in Jerusalem rather than in Constantinople, as it was the case from at least the beginning of the 17th century. The second form, was that Russian institutions, such as the Ecclesiastical Mission or the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society, were established in Jerusalem. Key moments in Russia's on-the-ground involvement included their active support for Patriarch Cyril II when he was deposed in 1872, and the Russian backing of Patriarch Damianos in the face of opposition from a Greek nationalist, we may call it, faction within the Brotherhood from 1908 to 1910, main leaders of which were the known Meletios Metaxakis and Chrysostomos Papadopoulos. While Russian representatives didn't ultimately change the power dynamics, as was the case with the Church of Antioch, they contributed to the development of a distinct communal identity in opposition to the dominant Greek one, as well as to the broader Palestinian Arab self-determination process. The third factor was that the nation-building process of ethnically diverse but religiously homogeneous groups within the Ottoman Empire had an important counter effect. That was the reaction of the proponents of Greek nationalism, which preceded chronologically. The construction of new national narratives that strategically utilized orthodoxy to foster a sense of collective identity positioned these national movements as the hostile other, as enemies to Greek nationalism and to the flourishing of the developing at that time national narrative of the great idea. Defining orthodoxy as a foundational element of Greek national identity meant that these antagonistic Christian nationalisms were addressing the same audience, target audience, as their Greek counterparts. Their mobilization thus posed an external threat to Athens' objectives and the interests of Greek Ottoman elites. This situation led to the creation of the influential narrative of Hellene Orthodoxia, which emphasizes a complete identification between Greek identity and Orthodoxy. In the case of Jerusalem, the politicization of Orthodoxy practically meant the representation of the sacred in nationalist terms, namely that the holy places were the Greek holy places. The Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre should have a Greek national character. The native Palestinian Orthodox should not intervene in the administration of the institution, and the Greek nation was defined as the custodian of the Christian heritage, in the Holy Land, being the royal nation. In effect, Hellenization process has been represented as a perpetual historical fact, the primordial and essential dominance of the Greeks within the Jerusalem Patriarchate, and thus pre-modern, while in contrast formed an effect of modernity and the overall national secularization process of Eastern Orthodoxy, which took place from late 18th and the beginning of 19th century. The historical ground constructed for legitimizing this discourse was grounded on the alleged ever-presence of the Greek element within the institution from the times of its establishment. According to this invented tradition, to this narrative, the modern Greeks, as the heirs of the Byzantine Empire, represent in principle the continuity of the Orthodox creed in the Holy Land. The use of Greek as the working language of the Patriarchate, as well as the Greek origins, or the supposed Greek origins of the Patriarchate's historical figures, were represented as indicative to this point. Okay. A series of studies and articles published in as separate works, as separate books, or as articles in various periodicals, such as Νέα Σιών, Πάντενος, Εκκλησιαστική Αλήθεια, played a special dissemination role, contributing to a large extent in structuring this new hegemonic discourse. In this respect, the reference books were by all means the works of Pavlos Karolidis, of Meletios Metaxakis, who was Metropolitan of Athens, later Patriarch of Constantinople, and later in Patriarch of Alexandria, Chrysostomos Papadopoulos, Archbishop of Athens, Timotheos Themelis, Patriarch of Jerusalem, and Kallistos Miliaras, Archimandrite Kallistos Miliaras. The major points of their historical scheme were, First, that the development of the Arab Orthodox movement was a construction and a token of the Russian multifaceted presence within the empire. Second, in contrast, the indigenous Christians, according to this narrative, have a Greek ethnic origin. And three, the term Rome should be or is synonymous with the Greek. In effect, the various legal decrees of the Port, which refer to the institution as the Rome Patriarchate, were actually establishing institutionally the Greek character of the brotherhood. Consequently, the Jerusalem Patriarchate was perceived as a Greek institution to the exclusion of every other ethnic community. Since the raison d'etre of the Patriarchate was the protection of the Orthodox rights over the holy places, the Greek nation, as a national community, was defined par excellence as the custodian of these sacred places. On the other hand, of course, the historical ground to support this theory is not so solid. From a methodological perspective, equating the modern pattern of political division, the Greek nation, with the pre-modern modes of communal belonging and ethnic identity is at least problematic, at least in theory, okay, according to theory. From a qualitative perspective, despite the fact that the classical Greek cultural legacy was by all means represented within the Jerusalem institution, and that many clergymen were coming from regions where the ethnic Greek element was dominant, from Peloponnesus, or from Crete, or from Samos. The native Orthodox, the native Arab Orthodox, had by all means an active participation in the church operation. From an institutional perspective, the identification of the concept of Rome with the Greek is highly disputed. This is because it actually had a religious meaning, signifying the Orthodox subject of the empire at large, without any ethnic or national connotation. Rome was the subject who recognized as her or his spiritual authority the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople, irrespective of his or her national or ethnic origin. He could speak Bulgarian or Serbian, but since he recognized the Patriarch of Constantinople, he was considered a Rome. Okay. The Greek narrative was not confined to ideology, but had certain effects on the church institutional framework as well. In brief, since the Patriarchate is Greek, the brotherhood which protects the Orthodox rights should be by definition Greek. Okay. Now, the Imperial Ottoman Law of 1875, the Turkish Order of 1910, as well as the British mandatory authorities, practically stood in favor of the Greek camp, excluding the native Orthodox from the administration. The basic causes of the pro-Greek stance were Ottoman communal politics, as well as various diplomatic considerations, basically counteracting the Russian influence on the one hand, and on the other, the fear of opening the Pandora's box, which is called status quo question in Palestine. It is characteristic that even the Jordanian law of 1958 actually reproduced the Greek authority, defining the Brotherhood Synod as the competent body to decide without restrictions about any church matter. The same applies to the case of Israel as well, after 1967 and the 6 Days War. This state of affairs, however, evidently hinders the democratization of the Patriarchate, since neither the lay community nor the parish clergy have a substantial involvement in the administration or the election of the Patriarch and the operation of the Synod. Instead of laicizing the communal operation, despotocracy has been put on the center. Moreover, it signifies the presence of Orientalism as an ideological element of the religious discourse, since the Palestinian Orthodox are viewed as non-eligible for ecclesiastical office. The Palestinian Orthodox actually consider it a form of religious colonialism. In order to get the broad picture, it is important to examine the material existence of religious politics in Palestine as well. This aspect is linked to the financial management of the religious vast real estate property. At the end of the 19th century, the Patriarchate had become the owner or the trustee of numerous Waqf properties, covering tens of thousands of hectares and hundreds of buildings, a large part of which were concentrated in Jerusalem area. On the one hand, the competent authority to manage the finances was the Patriarch with the Synod. On the other hand, the Arab congregation perceived the religious property as the endowments of the Church considered as a whole. The appropriate body, therefore, to control this property should be a mixed council composed of representatives from both the clergy and the laity, as it happens actually in Constantinople and Antioch from the mid-19th century onward, the so-called general regulations of the Room Millet. From the British Mandate onwards, however, the issue at stake was no longer the balance of power between the clergy and the laity, but the wider Arab national cause. This was because of the possibility the religious properties to be sold or leased to the Jewish National Fund, as to some extent it has actually happened. It is interesting to note the limited emphasis, and I conclude, the limited emphasis put on preventing in 19th century the Western conversion activities. This stance can be attributed to a combination of financial and political constraints, the institution's commitment to safeguarding the holy places, and the growing prominence of Greek nationalism in church discourse, which has caused the alienation of a large part of the congregation, of the flock, which converted to the Roman Catholic, in Palestine they call it Latin, Protestant and Greek Catholic communities. From a realistic perspective, changing the current operational paradigm, which represent, of course, national obsessions, seems quite difficult at the present political context. This is because the change of patriarchal regulations of 1958 from the clerical ethnic centralization norm to the communal universal democratization pattern is blocked by all the parties involved. Moreover, if the Greek character is related to the status quo of the holy places, which is disputed, it might create further impediments, the change of regulation, the reform of the regulation, might create further impediments to the broad Jerusalem question and the Patriarchate's interaction with the other religious communities. In any case, the transition to a new paradigm, which involves the denationalization within the Orthodox Church, depends to a great degree, I would say, on the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the future status of the Old City. And as we can see, unfortunately, this prospect is pretty much impossible to take place in the near future. Thank you so much for your
thank you very much for this very interesting paper and for keeping the time. And now we continue with the third and last paper for this session by Father Ioan Moga, who is professor, associate professor of systematic theology, Orthodox systematic theology, and head of the Faculty of Catholic Theology at the University of Vienna in Austria. And his paper is on dialectics of a Christian Christology in modernity, the case of the Romanian Orthodox theology. The floor is yours,
Thanks.
Father.
We have the big challenge. All are tired at the end of the day. I'm the last speaker, so how can I do it that you don't fall asleep? So, it works now. Should I try? Okay. Okay. If one looks at the history of the Romanian Orthodox theology in its academic form, from the founding of the first faculty in the 19th century until today with regard to its relationship to modernity, then one must first consider the different cultural contexts. Romanian language Orthodox theology was active in very different contexts, at least four at the end of the 19th century, in the Kingdom of Romania, in multi-confessional Transylvania and Banat, part of the Habsburg monarchy, in multi-religious Bukovina, also part of the Habsburg monarchy, and in Bessarabia, annexed by Russia. So at least four different cultural contexts with four different relationships to early modernity. In the Kingdom of Romania, this was a more formal turbo-modernization after centuries of isolation and Phanariotic dependence. In Transylvania, a competition with the Greek Catholic Church, who wanted to be seen as a modern, educated alternative to the uneducated Orthodoxy. In Bukovina was an integration in the Western academic system, and in Bessarabia, an adoption of the Russian contrasts. After 1918, theologians from all these contexts came together. This is why the interwar period is the most exciting time, because there, in an era of a relative political freedom, worlds collided. There were strong debates, for example, between the critically minded Transylvanian theology and orthodoxy, which envisaged a participatory model of the laity in the church, and the more traditional model of southern Romania. After the Second World War and the coming of the communist regime, a uniformization of this plural context and plural theology takes place. The critical voices all end up in prison, and if they survive, like Dumitru Stăniloae, come out of it changed. Critical theology dies in the prisons and survives as mystical theology. This is an important point. School theology takes a different path. Modernity is understood as the epitome of communist modernity, and one tries to find a solution of convivence. At the same time, from the 60s onwards, the ecumenical opening appears as modern, because as an opening to the confessional other, it leaves the time of exclusivism behind, so that the ecumenical discourse is an escape forward from a strong cultural isolationism. After the 90s, so after the revolution so-called, after a phase of probing and inter-Orthodox rediscovery, especially of Greek theology, we see an identification of modernity with secularization and the beginnings of a defensive attitude towards everything that smells of secularization. The defensiveness in terms of content is expressed in the form of a media offensive. This is a very brief outline of this question in the history of theology, of the Romanian theology. I will only take some points of this whole development. Finally, I would like to make a few remarks. First, in the end of the 19th century, Kingdom of Romania, so southern Romania and actual Moldavia, the national theological discourse, which already began at the end of the 19th century, was understood as promoted as emancipation from Turkish or Phanariotic pre-modern paternalism, and that's why as a modern model. The talk of national church is interpreted by Romanian theologians like Melchisedek Ștefănescu and others as an affirmation of a culture, of the local culture, this typology that also Professor Macready talked about. The apologetic model was the following: everything that is the opposite of Roman Catholic expansionism and church policy constitutes the Orthodox, that is, the care and the concern for the particular culture, for national identity. But there are also other dimensions of this emancipatory attitude. For example, at the end of the 19th century, the same Bishop Melchisedek Ștefănescu, who talked here about national church, advocated intercommunion in pastoral emergencies. So a pastoral theological tolerance in the interconfessional context with the Roman Catholics. So an unexpected stance of the time. Second, Černivtsi, a laboratory of modern theology. So another location, Bukovina, at the end of 19th century, the history of the city of Černivtsi continues to fascinate us not only by its unfortunately lost multicultural and multi-ethnic, multi-religious uniqueness, but also by the fact that the first German language Orthodox theological faculty at a Western university, Habsburg, functioned there between 1875 and 1918. This faculty played a unique role not only Bukovina, but also in the entire southeastern Europe region through these absolvents, especially for the development of an academic profile of Orthodox theology open to the West. The Orthodox faculty of Černivtsi was a unique experiment, not only in terms of its conscious engagement with the themes and methods of early modernity, but also through the interaction of Romanian and Ruthenian, so Ukrainian professors, which was not free of nationalist aspirations on both sides. But at the same time, the university's efforts, and some of these theologians were several times rectors of the university, was to create a multinational Bukovina identity. So in this time, 15 theologians taught as full professors there. 13 of them were Romanians, 2 of them were Ukrainians. The language was German, with some exceptions for the practical theology where it was Romanian or Ruthenian. In this period, we have 80 theologians who make a doctorate in theology in Černovci. The theological faculty in Černovci initially shared the profile of teaching the mimetic compilatory character of other Orthodox locations of the time. However, quite soon, the theologians of Černovci developed the consciousness of a profile independence, which could not only be increased by the unique university embedding in the Habsburg social context. The chair of fundamental theology, Vasile Găina, and the publications surrounding the establishment of this completely new subject, but also the moral theological contributions of Emilian Voiutsky are of great relevance, or probably not known, a very detailed study by Basil von Repta, the later Archbishop of Černovci and Metropolitan of Bukovina, on the relevance of psychology for the understanding and development of religious life at the end of 19th century. A very interesting study and huge, a comprehensive work that reveals a well-founded and positive pastoral theological engagement with the beginnings of psychology. This raises the legitimate question: did Černivtsi theology have a distinct self-awareness of its special position, or it is a construct of the later history of theology? The question is really easy to answer. These theologians were more than aware of the extraordinary new character of their faculty. For this, I have an example, the programmatic speech of the church historian Eusebiu Popovici, 1880, as a rector of the university at the time, and he speaks that the theology needs uninterrupted contact and dialogue with the other sciences, and he underlined the interdisciplinary character of the theological study. In later Romanian theological historiography, the faculty of Černovci was criticized by the Romanian Orthodox Church historians as being too Western-oriented. I think this judgment falls too short. the so-called adoption of the Western models was in fact the challenging with the cultural world in which the Chernivtsi theologians lived. An example, Emilian Voyutsky's speech on the question of women's emancipation, 1901, also the speech as entry as rector. Voyutsky pleads for the emancipation of women and for more women's rights in the labor market, in the social sphere, and in the legislation, but at the same time, he's against political rights of the women. So his approach remains ambivalent. However, my point is not to classify Voyutsky's vision as modern, but the fact that as a theologian in 91, he had the social ethical courage to enter the early debates of the time and to bring theological insights into controversy with social development. So if modernity is not only understood as a normative content, but also as an open attitude to deal with otherness and fairness in dialogue, then the German-speaking Orthodox theologians of Chernivtsi were pioneers of such a modern theology. Third point, Nicolae Balan, Iulius Scriban. Another place, Sibiu, Hermannstadt, in Transylvania, we see that there too, at the beginning of the 20th century, there were great theological personalities who advocated an opening of Orthodox theology to modernity. I will give two examples. Nicolae Balan, graduate of the Faculty of Chernivtsi and later Metropolitan of Transylvania. As 97, as a lay theologian, he founded the theological journal Revista Theologica, in which he struggled for a broad cultural theological education among the priesthood in what was still Habsburg Transylvania. As early as 97, he sketched a very positive picture of the interaction between religion and modern culture. Religion is a complementary part of human culture, a factor and a force of culture, he said. Religion cannot be against culture because there must be the most intimate, friendly union between religion and the other spiritual moral goods, which constitutes the essence of true culture. One can say this is utopic, of course, but we have the Nicolae Balan also this national paradigm. This also accounts for the ambivalence of this approach. Nevertheless, Balan's pro-modern culture program had a special orientation beyond his national leitmotif, as it was primarily intended as the theoretical underpinning of an urgent pastoral intellectual educational offensive for the Orthodox priesthood in Transylvania. More interesting is Iulius Scriban, also published in Revista Theologica of the time, but represented the Bucharest Theological School. He had studied Catholic and Protestant theology in Strasbourg and philosophy in Heidelberg, and taught at the Central Seminary in Bucharest, and late after the First War in Chisinau. He commented extensively on the internal Catholic debates around the modernism movement and the radical anti-modernist reaction of Vatican. So the encyclica Passend in 97, he strongly criticized the encyclical and defended the modernist agenda of the French and German theologians. What was his main criticism? Today, one would hardly believe it, the fact that the Pope tried to censor, to ban the theological research. He advocated a theology that was committed to the Church, but at the same time fully scientifically free. Scriban, literally, one should let people research, one should also let them err, so make mistakes, because even if something bad comes out of it, at the same time, without a doubt, a great deal of good will also unfold. New elements will be able to emerge to support the Church. So he's for an experimental way of doing theology. And he drew on the early church model, and he said that there, and so in the early church, opinions were also freely exchanged, and only in due course did the church place the seals of confirmation on what was the best. If this freedom had not existed, nothing could have unfolded, says Scriban. Theology should keep pace with scientific progress. Another quotation, science inexorably confronts us with even new problems which are not without influence on the church. Therefore, the theologian is always in a position to review his teachings and to know how to uphold them, temper their essence, and adapt them to the state of culture that has been reached. Of course, the possibility of straying is not excluded, just as it's apt to bring to the Church entirely new and necessary points of view. Whether with bad or good results, this work is necessary, and the Church demands it of the theologians. So the Church needs such an experimental theology. And the next page is also for Julius Kiban. It's nice quotation where she speaks, Christianity is eternally modern because it continually has to keep up with society and continually revise its plan and methods of Christian work in society. Nicolae Balan later became metropolitan and was able to put his educational offensive into practice. Julius Kiban was spared an ecclesiastical bishop's career, but he was in the 20s and 30s years one of the promoter of the ecumenical dialogue from the Romanian Orthodox side. So, fourth point, Nicolae Colan's appeal forward, 1922, and the critical theological journalism of the young Dumitru Stăniloae. The educational ideal, and with it a necessary opening to constant dialogue with modern culture and with other humanities, reminded a topos in the 20s and 30s in the faculty of Sibiu. The dialogue with the theological currents of Western Europe and the initial steps towards interconfessional dialogue at the time were part of a more complex program of critical opening to modernity that Metropolitan Nicolae Balan had in mind. So we find these impulses at many authors. One interesting is of the young Nicolae Colan, later Metropolitan of Transylvania, 1922. He wrote, "Where to, back to the simple means that were adequate to the patriarchal needs of our fathers, or forward to an even deeper understanding of the new contexts of life and the pastoral means that these new contexts demand? Posed in this way, in the form of a categorical alternative, the answer can only be one and clear: forward. The Church has very often lost her prestige because at certain moments of her development she was unable to see reality as it was." I think this is interesting. And to Dumitru Stăniloae was also a great advocate of the cultural formation of the priesthood. The reason for the pastoral crisis of the Church, he said, were on the insufficient opening of the Church to culture. I quote, "So it is not high culture that is a danger to the purity and spirituality of life, but semi-culture, the caricature of culture. We should say goodbye to the false opinion of an incompatibility between the priesthood and culture. In order to have a Christian influence of modernity, one must be at the cultural level of the modernity. One must know the cultural content on modernity," he says. This topos was increasingly overlaid by Stăniloae in the 30s by a national theological topos. He played a major role in this with his contributions to the Romanianism, to developing this theory of a national theology. What is interesting is the fact that Stăniloae, in addition to the question of national inculturation, formulated as a typology of this Romanian orthodoxy, principles like freedom, diversity, cultural openness, flexibility, these typologies that also Professor Makridis talked about, as specifics of this orthodoxy. Of course, from today's perspective, this political discourse is a construct. However, it's important to say also, that the young Stăniloae should not be reduced to only to this national theological discourse. He wrote hundreds of articles in that time, which today would be considered contributions to the field of social ethics, or like a public theology. He supported the concepts of the laity in the time, to engage more in the church and to be taken seriously by the hierarchs. Promoted this participation, following, of course, the Transylvanian model. In 32, he spoke in favor of a theological attitude that was not afraid, I quote, to be restless, to bring one's own theological opinion or a new experience into the church debate. So the same vision of an experimental theology, and for him the theology, the science, who the most promotes the freedom of spirit. So we go now in the 50s, the communist era. With the rise of communism, the critical theological public debate culture comes to an abrupt end. In Romanian school theology, the 50s are marked by anti-Catholic polemics and modes of adaptation to the communist discourse of modernity. Theodor M. Popescu, a church historian who would later be also political prisoner, so the photo is when he was arrested, 59, still emphasize elements that make orthodoxy appear modern, namely the active participation of the laity in all levels of the church decision-making, of course this is the Romanian model, the use of vernacular, the absence of any list of prohibitions, and so on. And she says, this is our orthodoxy, and it is modern. The interesting thing here is the criteriology, not the conservative, the traditional aspects of the orthodoxy are emphasized here, but the so-called modern, so freedom, diversity, self-determination, collegiality, equality. The reality, however, looked different in the meantime, and Theodor M. Popescu would also feel this 3 years later when he was arrested. But for the totalitarian context of the 50s, Popescu's views were highly reactionary. He's the only one in his period who, in another article, is willing to openly criticize the current situation of the Orthodox churches and to make a sort of self-criticism of the situation of the Orthodox Church. And he openly advocates, so in the 50s, a real ecumenical dialogue. Nevertheless, this romantic paradigm of a modern free orthodoxy versus totalitarian, juridical, authoritarian Roman Catholicism still remained in the Romanian theology until the 70s. An essay by Dumitru Stăniloae, from 1972, after he came free from the prison, this is also his photo when he got arrested at the end of the 50s, provides insight into the Orthodox on this Orthodox self-diagnosis vis-à-vis the modern world. He believes that the crisis of the Western Christianity came because it did not open enough to the modern world. In contrast, the Orthodox Church is much more flexible, open to the world, culturally open, democratic and modern, so the lack of over-dogmatization, the closeness to the everyday concerns of the people, the local character, and the remaining mutual relationship between clergy and faithful, he said we have no clericalism, all these have saved Eastern Orthodoxy from a crisis. So Stăniloae still saw in the early 70s the aggiornamento as a chance for Western Christianity to free itself from moralizing aspects. So he says, away from moral Pharisaism, from centralism, from institutionalism, towards a decentralization, towards an elasticity of institutional structures, and so on. The typology is clear. Orthodoxy is a people's church, close to the people, open to social developments and to modern progress. I argue that Stăniloae was not so naive as to believe that the Orthodox Church had no challenges regarding modernity. This is the theme of the research. Rather, I think that he is formulating principles which, because of the communist censorship, he can only formulate of the problem of the others. One must not forget the strong and attentive censorship at the time for every article who was published. And the last sign of life from before the revolution is an article that the actual Patriarch of Romania published. He was still a monk at the 1989. where we still have this pro-modern discourse, I can say, is an article published in St. Vladimir's Review on the tasks of contemporary theology. And what it says there on the tasks of this theology, to be more self-critical, to be more biblical and mystagogical, and to have more attention to the concrete historical context and to modern culture. So, after the 90s, after the fall of communism at the latest, these approaches are almost forgotten. The appeal to a self-critical theology and to an opening to the modern culture falls into oblivion, especially through the discovery of neoconservative spiritual discourses. Romanian theology loses contact with these previous approaches. Of course, we have also another type of modernity and modernity challenges. Conservative is now the mainstream and is equalized with secularization. The massive influx of translation from all corners of global orthodoxy leads to different tendencies. The most representative tendency of all is a retreat into spirituality on the background of a skeptical but not consequent rejecting attitude towards the West. In the last 30 years, Romanian society has found its own hybrid form of modernization, Western-oriented but still deeply religious. My cautious thesis is that the Romanian Orthodox theology strongly follows also this social pattern, both as well as. So it wants to remain part of the academic university world, so there is no debate or no desire to have ecclesiastical academies. So they want to be part of the university discourse, but it remains deeply ecclesiastical. This is, one can say, the Romanian symphony between tradition and modernity. For the discourse of the Romanian language theology, this means it is a very decent, well-behaved theology. The fundamental theological charges of resituating Romanian Orthodox theology are best expressed in these two-volume handbooks of Orthodox apologetics, and there is interesting how they argue their position. The authors of the handbooks see Dumitru Stăniloae's vision of the specificity of the Romanian spirit as a basis of the apologetic position of the Romanian theology in the postmodern era. So like a balance between reason and mystery, between the rational clarity of personalistic Latinity, so Latin people, and the sense of mystery of the East. So you know the typology. I had another chapter on Father Andrei Scrima, but I will skip, and I come to the end. Outlook. The brief presentation of some station in the history of theology in Romanian Orthodox discourse on modernity shows, on the one hand, the inherent contextuality, historical and also geographical, but also a surprising plurality in the treatment of this topic. I'd like to conclude by emphasizing the incarnational theological necessity of a kairology for and in postmodernity, or how we call it. There is a false alternative between ressourcement and aggiornamento, which is fixed along the lines in the Roman Catholic development. Today, with the necessity distance we have to the 20th century, is not our century anymore, we see that both mere ressourcement and aggiornamento have their shadows. There must also be a third way, if you want, a way where the coherence of tradition, critically read, as we saw it, does not prove incompatible with a lived creativity. A path between or beyond the polarity between continuity and discontinuity, beyond defensive flight from history and mimetic adaptation of the trends of the day. So this path is not to be considered whether backwards or forward, but perhaps to a more fundamental attitude. I would call this aneptic kairology. Of course, there are only concept. Kairology as discerning of the times is very often mentioned in the practical theology. I should also I think we should make strong this also for the field of fundamental theology. theology cannot ignore history, as we saw already today. It especially cannot ignore the fact that, as Staniloae also, I can also quote Staniloae, as you see for the Romanians, he's an authority, it performs hermeneutical service for the people of the present, not for the people of yesterday or the day after tomorrow. So theology cannot ignore history, not because it has to articulate itself as a science's historical frameworks, but because it can only major in history and become faithful to its basic incarnational principle. So a demonization of the time in which we live, no matter how we name it, cannot be justified eschatologically. It is rather docetic, so anti-incarnational, and also anti-prophetic, because it does not want to pass the test of the incarnation. But also relativistic naivety cannot be a solution. So between these extremes, there are sufficient frameworks for a prophetic critical theology. However, this incarnational barometer, it is not a theoretical one, but deeply personal. So reflection on the relationship between the church and modernity must be, I think, be practical, theological based, anchored, so in the different context in there we live. The challenges are different, the answers also should be different. So the attempt to impose only one particular kind of discourse proves to be a loser, also from a missionary point of view. So postmodern pluralism must be matched by a coherent plurality, I underline a coherent plurality of the ecclesial responses. So a plurality, not a cacophony. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Father Ioan. Now the floor is open for the discussion. I think that we have a good 35 minutes. So, who would like to ask first?
Yeah, thank you very much for these extremely interesting papers. Actually, I have questions for one of the speakers. I have many questions, but I will limit myself to one question for each speaker. Sister, thank you very much for this paper, which gave us a kind of overview of the encounter of Russian Orthodox thought with modernity. I would like to ask a very specific question. There are some people who claim that what we experience now in Russia has its roots back in the past. And I would like to ask you if you see any affinity between some aspects of Sobornost with the dominant today ideas. This is my question. It's a bit provocative, but I think that we should go this direction too. For Professor Papastathis, thank you very much for your paper and all the insights to this very complex and very difficult situation. As you maybe know, I wrote about this in the past, and I characterized the situation in the Patriarchate of Jerusalem as a kind of ecclesiastical neo-colonialism. Things are changing very, very quickly. I think one element we should now take in account is not just the problem between the Greek brotherhood of the Saint Sepulchre, but also the problem is not only now between, between Greeks and Palestinians or Arabs. The problem is now between Greeks, Palestinians, and the people who came from Russia. And I think that the number of people who came from Russia saying that they are Jews, but actually they are Orthodox people, I think they are about 300,000. So from the size point of view, they are the majority community. And so this changes completely the date of the problem. But I think that one element we should take in account when we go back in history, I think one thing that that played a very important role was the process of Arabization of the Antioch Patriarchate. I think this was a kind of, how to say, a kind of threat for the Greek dominance on the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. And I think since then, this threat of a possible Arabization defined the attitude of the Greek fathers of the Brotherhood. And a last, I would say, methodological remark, also question, because thank you, Father Ioan Moga, you gave us many information and many insights from this kind of Romanian encounter with modernity. But I have a kind of methodological doubt or maybe remark. I don't know if it is easy to speak on the encounter with modernity based mainly on this kind of sociological or how to say demographic or how to say external data. For example, at some point you spoke about the paternalistic role of the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the liberation of the Romanian Orthodox Church, etc., from this. But if you see, for example, if you see today, the situation, allow me to say that my impression is that the Patriarchate of Constantinople is much more modern than the Romanian Orthodox Church. And the relation, the contact of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, which is under the Turkish dominance even today, is much more fruitful. The encounter with modernity is much more fruitful than the Romanian Orthodox Church, although the Patriarchate of Constantinople, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, is actually a pre-modern institution. So I wonder, for example, Staniloae and his famous theory about Romanianism as the most genuine, the most authentic expression of Orthodox spirituality, etc., and also Balan and Kreinig. I think this is not the encounter with modernity. This is actually romanticism. And we should make the distinction between these completely different trends. So, and I would be also very much interested to hear about Father Andrei Scrima, but you skipped this part. Nevertheless, I wonder, and this is my last point, I wonder if we could integrate in your presentation Nikolai Steinhardt. He was a literary author, a literary critic. He was not a theologian, stricto sensu. But I think he was the Romanian Orthodox thinker the most involved with modernity. And at some point, I think you should include Nikolai Steinhardt in your presentation. So thank you very much.
I would suggest that we get a first round of questions so that we can somehow have a better, let's say, possibility for everybody to talk. So, Georgios Vladis, then Professor Koundouma, and then here. Yes.
Yes, I would like to thank you, Father Ioan, for this wonderful presentation. I learned a lot about all these very important figures. I have two questions. If I understand you correctly, in the first half of the 20th century, we have voices who speak of a kind of programmatic openness, so to say, to modernity. They say that the Church should open itself, should start dialogue with the modern world, and so on. Is this something one-sided, or was there a kind of interaction with a more secular intelligentsia in Romania? Was it reciprocal? I'm thinking of some figures like Mircea Eliade, the young Eliade. Does he react on these things? And this very open Eliade is also in his youth a person, and this is also now my second question, a person connected with the Iron Guard with strongly anti-Semitic ideas. And this is also something, I'm sorry if I have to raise also some questions considering the authority of Father Staniloae. But on the one side, we are reading his wonderful appeals for dialogue and so on with the modern world. On the other side, there are shockingly anti-Semitic passages in his work, shockingly anti-Semitic, in the magazine Telegraful Roman, for example, in the 30s and 40s. And I'd like to ask, is it just the zeitgeist, so to say? Was it the influence of his time? Or was it something more organic and has also with these romantic ideas of Romanianism and so on? And how does it also affect his attitude to modernity? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Professor Konduma, please, and then... Yes, it's better so that we can have...
Yes, thank you. I would like to address a question to Dr. Papastathis. I was really very interested by this presentation you made, and which is exactly about a period which really, for me, it's completely, I never worked about this period, so I learned many things, and I think it's really important what you said. Maybe as you noticed since this morning, I'm working on the period before. So you start with the Tanzimat. I'm stopping around, let's say, the really last year, it's 1835. So it's exactly 4 years before the Tanzimat. So I would like to react to something you said. Maybe I did not hear it exactly what you said, but you said, I think, Hellenization has been represented, so you're talking about this narrative, as a perpetual historical fact, and thus pre-modern. So, of course, in order to discuss this point of view, and I think if we keep the thing strictly speaking, okay, I mean, we have to agree, but if we see the things as they happened in the longue durée, it's not, I think we should put some nuance in this statement. So, okay, if we say Hellenization is the Greek state, the Greek church, okay. But if we see something else, it's, I think, by studying this phenomenon in Jerusalem for the other periods, I think there are multiple waves of, we could say Hellenization, but of presence of Greek, let's say Greek or Greek speaking, if you want, a strong presence in Jerusalem. Even since the 8th century, and Vangelis spoke about Antiochia, so the Arabization of Antiochian Church, but this Arabization has already begun in the 8th century. So this is something really for centuries and centuries. We have these waves. So this is. So we could say that there is a polarization with Arabic in Antioch and Greek-speaking Christians in Jerusalem. These are historical facts. I mean, we can notice that the Jerusalem Patriarchate in the Byzantine and especially because the post-Byzantine period in Jerusalem starts in the 7th century. So we have also to see that these parts of the world, they are not Byzantine anymore after 638, etc. So, okay, there is a re-Byzantinization of Syria for a certain short time, but there is not any more Byzantium there. This is the Arab world. So this Umayyad Empire, and so something happens which keeps Greek in Jerusalem. Maybe not for the whole period, but in waves there is a strong presence of Greek speaking. I do not want to say that these people are Greeks as we understand today. But anyway, the production, the literary production in Jerusalem is in Greek. And of course, I'm thinking about John of Damascus, who never wrote another thing than Greek. But of course, we know we have also Georgians, Armenians, etc. So this is one thing. And of course, in the period of the Ottoman Empire, which is not the period of the first, let's say, Arabization of the Palestine, there are networks, extremely important networks, which are Greek. We cannot say Greek, of course, but they are people, as you say, they come from Peloponnesus, they come from other parts of Greece, but especially from Peloponnesus, because there is a big network of Peloponnesian families who really keep the Patriarchate of Jerusalem in the 17th century. And these people, I would not say that there is an ethnic nationalism or even a proto-nationalism, but they are active in order to help to keep the Greek, let's say, part of this thing. So this is what I wanted to say. And there is also another thing, is that the Jerusalem Patriarchate for the Ottomans, it's nothing. It's nothing. I mean, for the Ottomans, they have the Constantinopolitan Patriarch, and he is the chief of the Christians. Yes, but yes, sorry, yes, I'm stopped. And for Jerusalem has only a meaning, an internal meaning for the church. You see, so these are all these points. I don't want to. I think we could just talk about. We could talk about it later, but I think it's important. I think to see also this depth of the problem. But I agree with you that something happened after. So this I don't want to make any. I'm not any critics about that. But I think that before, and with this assertion, we have to see maybe the things. I think that things are much more complicated.
I would like that we be a little bit brief so that we can give some time for our speakers really also to respond, because that's unfair to them. So,
It's on. Oh, okay. Goes to Father Ioan. All these authors you quoted, most of them excepting Scriban and Popescu have a background in the liberal Transylvania or in the Austrian Bukovina. So do you think this background plays a role for their thinking and their attitude?
And there is a question on the internet by Professor Ladouceur, so I think we should offer him the opportunity to pose his question as well, if that's okay with you. Please. Panagiotis, can we do that? Yeah. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much for these three interesting papers. I have a question for Father Ioan Moga. Father Ioan, you described very well a progressive strand, I would say, in 20th century Romanian theology, tracing it through a number of figures, Scriban, Balan, Colan, Staniloae, and Shrima, that you didn't discuss in detail. My question really is, in light of the fact that the Romanian Orthodox Church, certainly in its contemporary context, hardly appears as a modernist church, but in the earlier period, in the 20th century that you're talking about, how much impact or influence did these authors have within the church itself? For example, in the interwar period, during the communist period, say up to 1990. I mean, the only thing that I could think of during the communist period that would point to modernity, something which is, I don't think, very inadequately studied, is the social apostolate and the servant church idea. These could be interpreted to be modernist, but said they're not very much studied. and yet they can perhaps be put in that category. So how much influence did these people really have over a period of almost close to a century? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So, Sister Tereza, Father. What's the problem?
That's terrible. In my university, there is a lot of fathers, so it's very common. Thank you so much for your question. And quite recently, in May, during the conference in Kyrgyzstan about the philosophy of religion on the West and East, Dmitry Biryukov, probably you know his publications, posed the question if soborness is political conception as well. If soborness is responsible for some totalitarian tendency which we can observe nowadays in Russia. So it's a good question actually, because of course any philosophical conception, in my opinion, couldn't be recognized as responsible for some political misinterpreting or using or misusing or and so on. Sobornost, as I understand the sobornost is the conception which could be found perhaps in New Testament, in patristic heritage, and so on. It depends how we understand sobornost. If we understand sobornost just as a union between God and the world and the church and so on, it is a pretty religious conception. But when the people try to use this conception for some other purposes, in other contexts, of course, it could be treated as a source of some totalitarian tendencies, for instance, and so on. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but as a conception, it's okay. But Biryukov said that there is some soborness supposes the submission of person to the some totalitarian to the whole, which could be translated as a submission of person to the state, to the as a totalitarian conception, but it depends on the using or misusing of this conception, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the questions. They're very interesting questions. So, first, let me begin with your question. So, the presence of Greeks before 19th century. So, I don't dispute that there were Greeks, ethnic Greeks. So first we have to do the distinction between ethnicité and nation. So it's evident. So there are ethnic Greeks. There are no ethnic Greeks. Let's call them ethnic Arabs or ethnic whatever. But following the institutional framework, the legal framework, and the social norms within the Ottoman Empire and before the Ottoman Empire, okay, we are speaking about the Rum community. And the Rum community is not Greek, it's not Arab, it's Rum. And the communal belonging depends solely on the recognition of the authority of the spiritual head. So, John of Damascus, and also we have the problem of translating the term Rum. So, in French, we have Grec, but it's not Grec. It's room. It's different. So I mean, in the Western, apologies for the use of the term West, they have translated as Greek, Greek, so it's not room. And what I want to say is that the dividing line is that between ethnic and nation is the claim to national independence. It's a political claim. So since we don't have this political claim before the 19th century, we cannot speak about Greeks, nation. We can speak about Greek ethnic, or as you call it, proto-nationalism. So it's this is the religious language, and when we the use of Greek, there is of course they use Greek. However, this was the religious language, and it was the religious language. Yes, and it was Arabic in the parishes, as well as Greek, and we should keep in mind that, especially after the 17th century, the Jerusalem Patriarchate had two layers of authority, of power, one in Constantinople and one in Jerusalem. In Constantinople, we know that the head of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, residing in Constantinople, was elected by the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the Phanariot elite. In Jerusalem, we have minutes. The minutes were written in Arabic. So that means that we have a proof that Greek was not, it was a dominant working language within the Patriarchate. However, Arabic was a working language as well. And it was not in terms of, it did not have a national political claim. It was, sorry? It was pragmatic, yeah. And of course, yes, for the Ottomans, Jerusalem was nothing until mid-19th century at least. But at least the Orthodox Church. However, from a geopolitical point of view, Jerusalem was very important for the West and for Russia. Because through Jerusalem, through the holy places question, they had the opportunity to exercise what we call now soft power. And this is why we have the status quo question and the status quo of the holy places. So, and this problem is not of the 19th century. We know that Cyril Lucaris in the 17th century was the negotiator, the mediator of the Jerusalem Patriarchate to the port for this question. So, as regards the religious issues, Jerusalem was very important for, or not very, but important for the port. This is an open question. How, if it was Greek, if it was Arabic, if it was, I don't know. But what is for sure is that we don't have a dominant national community and the relation between the dominant and the dominated within the community of Jerusalem. So before 18th century, or 17th century, we cannot say that, okay, Greek nation, that the Brotherhood had a Greek national character. As we think of it today, in our days. It was something different. Of course, Greek culture, Greeks were there, but it did not have a definite national character. That's my point. As regards Professor Kalatzidis, so he opened the Pandora's box about the Russian presence in Palestine. Briefly, the status of the Russian Orthodox in Palestine and their involvement in the Patriarchate, and if the Greek Brotherhood is threatened by the Russian presence, if I understood your question, depends on, first, the stance of Russia vis-à-vis Israel, and so it's related to geopolitics, because Israel cannot allow, to my view, the Jerusalem Church to become under the control of Moscow. Second, the stance of the Jerusalem Church vis-à-vis Russia. So we can see in the Ukrainian question what happened. And a third factor is that the Russian Orthodox or the Russian immigrants in Israel-Palestine, they are secular, mostly secular. In any case, I think that Israel is very happy with the current situation, with the current status within the Orthodox Patriarchate, in the sense that it does not, the Greek presence does not allow the Arab Palestinians to take the control, and at the same time, the Russians have cannot, it's like blocking the expansion of the Russian influence within the Jerusalem Church. As far as the Antiochian Church is concerned, and whether it was a threat for, or still is a threat, or is considered a threat by the Jerusalem Brotherhood, I would say that it used to be a threat, we know from the sources, until the British Mandate. It was considered a threat, but it is a different context. So we are speaking about different jurisdictions, different structure. The Jerusalem Church is structured in a monastic brotherhood, the Antioch Church not. Different state authorities and antagonistic state authorities between them. After 1917 and the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian presence there was actually blocked. The British and the Jordanians and the Israelis will never allow, to my view, and never allowed actually, the Russians to get the Patriarchate under the control of Moscow. It's very difficult, and it will have very important political consequences. And we can discuss it further.
Thanks. Yeah, there are a lot of questions, like huge questions. So my aim was to present an overview of the different discourses on what should be modernity in the different contexts. And that's why I choose for the first step this self-understanding of the author. That's why this speech of the Phanariotic paternalism is how they understood the emancipation from this foreign determination at that time. And then the national discourse was seen as a modern, emancipated discourse. So this is methodologically the first step to see what was the self-understanding and there of how it is really have been. But for all these points, one should take it into deeper research. How modern the Romanian Patriarchate today is a huge question. One should ask also the religious sociologist. I'm a priest of the Romanian Patriarchate, so I better don't say anything. Yes. On Scrima or Steinhardt, I choose the theological discourses in the academic form, and that's why I put away all these other authors. They are very, very interesting. I think this is another part of a discourse. One can take it in the written form. Steinhardt, of course. Scrima is half academic author because I had a paper where his lectures in Beirut in the 70s on the critical dimension function of the faith. And it's very interesting. It's a more philosophical, it's philosophy of the faith, so like a religious philosophy. It is very interesting. It's complementary. Steinhardt is another chapter. One can take it in the account for the written form. Of course, this is the question: how's really modern or really dialogical or really productive these all discourse were? This is the next question. And Steinhardt is an author. He was not a theologian, but he, in all these writings, he as a literary critical, he brings in an open dialogue the Christian faith with all this world of literature and culture. So one can say he really have done what the authors said 50 years ago with this symbiosis between theology and culture. To the question of Georgios Lantis, it's a very difficult question. We had interactions, so debates between theologians and intelligentsia, intellectuals, not only in the interwar period. A very known debate, polemical debate, is between Staniloae and Lucian Blaga, the philosopher of that time, the religious philosopher of that time. And one say also how different the methodologies and the views were, but this is a question for it. From the anti-Semitic views, Kreinik, of course, was one author who not only had those anti-Semitic texts, but he was also active in the regimes. Staniloae was at least influenced by this. So there are some texts. Now they are actual because he should be canonized 2025, Dumitru Staniloae, by the Romanian Orthodox Church. Yeah, this is a matter of research. How can we contextualize this? But for me, it's. I think my aim was to show, because this question on the national ethnotheology, how one calls this, of Staniloae in the 30s, is very good known in the research. So a lot of studies, but there are hundreds of articles of Staniloae who don't deal with this. And my way is to focus on this, to say he was a critical theologian, also critical to the hierarchy of the time. He was a man who really had a lot for the participation of the laity in the decisive organs of the Roman Patriarchate. And one should not forget all these other things who promoted in the 20s, in the 30s and 40s. And that's why also he had problems with communists, because 47 he was not allowed anymore to teach because of this, not because of the national theology, because it was for the communists not a problem, because of the other articles of him, of these critical public theological articles. And this is forgotten in the actual research of Staniloae. The other, how contextual this of course, they are very contextualized, these things, because for the from the perspective of southern Romanian was the Transylvanian Orthodoxy a liberal, a cultural, intellectual one. And of course, these authors are the best example for it. Iulius Scriban was an exception. That's why Nicolae Bălan became a metropolitan. Iulius Scriban had no career chance with this too modern or too modernist discourse. And of course, Bukovina, but also Transylvania, had the position to encourage this system. The national theological discourse, one should be understood also in this great concurrency to the Greek Catholic theology. Who is the most Romanian theology in the 30s? Yeah, because in Transylvania was quite the same number of Orthodox and Greek Catholic faithful, and both Greek Catholic theology and church was who in the Școala Adeleană, so the Transylvanian school, who promoted the national paradigm. And then the Orthodox in the 20s, 30s want to say, we are the more Romanians that you are. So it's also in a Transylvanian concurrency, who is very, very polemics in the time. And the impact on the church, it depends. I think Iulius Scriban had not a real impact on the church, and the best example is he published this in the Transylvanian Revistă Theologica. So in another context, he was Bucharest theologian, but he published in the diaspora, so in a Habsburg Romanian review. For the Transylvanian context, I think what the young Bălan and the young Staniloae have wrote it had an impact on the ground and the priesthood. In the communist regime articles, it's a huge debate. What is a discourse on modernity? What is an official discourse? So I didn't relate to the apostolate, social apostolate of Patriarch Justinian, because it's an official discourse of the Patriarchate. One should differentiate it. So this official discourse of the Romanian Orthodox Church, so Patriarch Justinian with this Apostola Social, how different theologians still find in the theological reviews of the 50, 60 still a place to publish some things where still try to find a way to article some theological points and not to be censorship. And the official discourse of the school theology, who is really compromised in the taking the official regime discourse and to speak also of the new man, yes, new man who is the communist man, and it also the Pauline new man and so on. There are a lot of articles in this direction. I didn't speak about it because it's a false understanding of modernity. So one should also in the communist publication or the articles were published in the communist time to distinguish all these levels.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I think we can call it a day off for today. Yes, I think it's about time, isn't it? Yes. Exactly. Okay. You can continue in dinner. It's easier there. So thank you very much.